Hi my friend, in this video we're going to be making a groovy house song inspired by Chris Lake's edit of Harry Romero's song, Fool for Love. We're going to find out if we can do this in under 6 hours by using the 80-20 rule of house music production. What you're listening to right now is the song that we'll be working on. And what you're looking at right now is the Ableton project file that we'll be working on. What we're going to do is we're going to go in order of how I actually built things out. So we're going to start with the drums, going layer by layer as I built it out, moving on to the bass, then adding in the vocals, and then all the melodic elements like the chords, the guitars, and all that. And then as well as taking a look at how you can take a loop like this and extend it into a fully complete song. Make sure you stick around to the end of the video because we'll be doing a full recap of the 80-20 rule so you can apply what you're learning in this video to your own music as directly as possible. Because all in all, it only took me about 5 or 6 hours to get this one done. And as you can see, it's fully mixed, mastered, arranged, ready to go to be used in DJ sets or sent out to labels. So if finishing songs faster is something that you'd like help with, I've also made you a free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that I use to completely finish one song like this every single week. Just visit the link that's on screen now or in the description to grab your copy of the Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit for free. And if you want to take things to the next level, you can also find a link to this video's project files in the description as well. With that said, let's jump into this. Alright. So first things first, let's have a listen to the drums without me yapping so you can just hear kind of what's going on here. Cool, so it's kind of like techie, housey kind of drums that we're going to be creating here. So first things first, I'm going to turn off every single layer so we can go in order as I actually built it out while I was creating it, so you can kind of go through the thought process of how I was going through this, so you can do something similar when you're building it yourself. So we're going to start with the kick, and before that, there's definitely a little trick I want to show you. What I'd recommend doing is grabbing the song that you want to use as a reference and throwing it in here, and then turning it off and setting it up so when you press the S key on your keyboard, it'll flip between what you're working on and the reference. It's going to be really, really important. That way you can build your drum track to a professional standard. Also, what I'd recommend is once you throw it in here, using what I call an arrangement track, or I'm sure many people call it this, but it's just dummy MIDI clips that you can color code so you can figure out where the sections of each song are. And this is important because once you build out the song vertically, like you create your loop, you're going to be able to use this to flesh everything out into an actual full track. And then also as you're building out sections of the song, say when you're working on the drums, it could be important to find an area where there's just drums, like for example, the intro or the outro. And you can kind of move your loop marker over here, work on the drums here, then move your loop marker over to where the bass comes in, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's a really important first thing I want to get off the bat, because we're going to be heavily using the reference track in order to get a high quality drum track going on here. So with that out of the way, the first thing we're going to go over is a kick. And if you've been following these videos for a while, you'll notice now the kick is outside of the drum group, and we're going to get into that in more the tail end of this video, talking about the mixing side of things. But first things first, always the first thing to do, in my opinion, is make sure you have the right pattern. So with my template that you can grab, if you want to grab the project files, I have this kick set up so that there's already a drum rack with a bunch of usable sounds, as well as MIDI clip with like the obvious drum pattern. So it's this 4 on the floor, 1, 2, 3, 4 pattern. So I didn't have to do too much moving around or create any MIDI clips. It was already ready to go, because when listening back and forth between what we have and the reference, you can hear it's just a classic 4 on the floor kick drum. So once we have the pattern on the way, let's move right along to the next step, which is once you have the pattern, setting the right sound selection. And what I'm finding with drums, one of the best ways to do this is to find a section of the song that has just the drums, which again is why it's important to have these nice little arrangement markers here, and find an area where they're like the kick is more or less playing by itself. So I found this area right here, and I just kind of snipped it out just like this. And you can hear there's like a crash cymbal, and I'm gonna show you how you can actually steal this in a nice way. So once you've kind of grabbed it, you do Command E on each side, and press Command J to consolidate it. So this way it's not like the full, like if I zoom out on this sample, it's not the full track, but if I go here and then zoom out, it's the full song. So you want to make sure that it's as isolated as possible. And then what I have over here, and you can have access to this again in the project files, but I have this little R kick drum rack. And so I just dragged it into here. And then it has a couple of interesting features, basically just macros of the Ableton Simpler device to make things a lot quicker and easier to use. The main thing here is instead of just bringing down the filter frequency, which would kind of make it sound unnatural, like it does get rid of kind of like that crash and some of the cymbals and all that, but it makes it sound like it's losing a lot of the character of the kick drum. You can set it to a filter envelope, and this way it's going to kind of retain a lot of that actual drum sound. So let me just show you what that sounds like here. So that is the kick isolated, and if I bring up the filter frequency, you can hear all that, like the cymbals and everything like that. So this way, what you do have is you have a kick that you've snatched from the actual track, and that's going to be very close to the sound selection. Something that I'd also recommend doing is you can flatten and freeze that if you want to use this as a similar sound source, but you can also use a similar sound source for the one that you snatched right here. So what do I mean by that? So right here, there's this original kick sound. If I click this in Ableton 12, right click it and press show in browser, it's going to show the sample in the browser here, and this little button here, if you press this, it's going to show a bunch of sounds that are similar in like timbre and quality and texture and all that kind of good stuff to that original source that you've just snipped out. So this is a really cool way that you can build up a nice little, use that technique to build up a library, you could see here, of similar sounds that you can then use to audition to try to find the best one that sounds as similar as possible with the reference. This way you have one that you've stolen from the track, and then you also have one that is actually from your like one-shot library, which is probably going to be more high quality. And then I'm going to show you a way that you can blend the two. So, but first, I want to show you kind of the method once you've built out a little library. Basically, the idea is pretty simple. Like I'd find an area of the track where there's just drums playing. And then what you can just do is you can grab one of these and then flick between the reference track, almost like rhythmically, and then use the arrow key like that. Just like that. So you're kind of jumping between the reference and yours and flicking between the different samples that you found to find the one that sounds the most similar to your ear. Obviously, at a certain point, you can decide, like, I don't think it sounds similar, but I like how this particular kick sounds, and that's cool. But that's kind of the idea here. This way you're getting something really similar to the source material. Then another trick that I like to do is, I've been doing this quite a bit for most of these, is if you grab the notes here and press Option, it'll make a duplicate of it. And I'm just dragging that down to the stolen kick. So this way I have a one shot that sounds similar playing as well as the stolen kick. And then, sorry about that. And then what I've just simply done is use an EQ to remove a bunch of the low end. So like the meat and the potatoes is coming from the one shot. So it's a high quality one shot. And some of the texture, the mids and the high end is coming from that stolen kick. And they're kind of working together to sound nice, in my opinion. Then something I have been adding quite a bit lately is this drum bus. And basically using this boom feature to add a bit of subbiness to the bottom end. So if we listen to this without it, and then with it, just add some like low end subbiness, can sound a bit fuller, more professional, particularly when you're stealing kicks. Like if you were just using the stolen kick, which is totally something that could work. Something like this could help add in a little bit of extra low end to that stolen kick, which could be useful. And in this case, I'm also shelving out some of the highs as opposed to filtering out some of the highs. Look like this, which is just a little bit more of a natural way to tame some of the high end without having that really like mellowed out sound. So that's kind of what happened there. Then the last step. So first step is to get the right pattern. Second step is to get the right sound. Third step is to just get the right volume. So the main method here is just listening to it, flicking back and forth, and adjusting your volume on the main track fader here. Just doing this and doing it in a way it's rhythmic where you can almost imagine hearing your kick in the song because you're doing it in a rhythmic way like that. And just adjust your volume so you get a similar volume level, a similar power kind of level, if that makes sense. Getting a little Dragon Ball Z reference there. But that would be the idea. Once you have the right set pattern, the right sound, and the right volume, that's going to be that 80% of the way there. That's going to make your stuff sound professional, and you don't have to worry too much about crazy processing or anything like that. The next step, once you have the kick, because the kick is one of the most fundamental bits of the drum kind of cohesive sound, what I would recommend doing next is going through basically the same procedure as you're listening to each additional element and going in order of what you hear or perceive to be as the most important next element. In most cases after the kick, this is probably going to either be the open hat or the clap or snare. So use your ear to decide what you think is the most important, then dial that next sound in. So in this instance, what I heard next was the open. So let me jump into the section here and I'll give you a look and listen to the open here. And the reference. So definitely a little different. I definitely kind of struggled with getting the right hi-hat sound, the right open hi-hat sound, but this is generally a look at what this is. So let me break down the pattern first. So main thing is it's just this like on the offbeat here. If you can see this, just pay attention to this one here. So the offbeat, that's that classic open hat sound. And again, the template that I have sets this up so it's already there, so I don't have to like plug this in each time. It's just all about working fast. And then what I have is that's similar here and here. So in this one, I was hearing like a bunch of different layers, open hat layers, kind of panned mostly to the left, and then maybe one on the right, just kind of balancing things out a little bit. And then there's also that little like little kind of groove bit that comes in. You can see that right here and right here. And then it's also bouncing like call and response. So this one hits and then that one hits. So let's kind of have a look in. Like, and then the second one goes. So cool little groove here. Very subtle, but very nice. I'm not sure if I nailed the drum sound, but also when you hear the kind of Billie Eilish flip that I did of it, I feel like it works to let that vocal shine a little bit more. So I did end up taking a little bit of creative liberties, but let's kind of look at the pattern there. So it's mostly just the classic open hat pattern with a little bit of a skippiness and then a couple different layered sounds. Again, same thing, was just flicking back and forth between the reference and what I was building to try to find the right sounds. I did also use the similar sound function. So in my template for this, if you look at the drum rack that I have set up, this group here are all like hi-hat sounds that I took the time to take from different reference tracks and build out like a little library. So I always have some open hats that I can use really quickly instead of having to go through the whole browser and waste a bunch of time. Here I have like 5 or 6 ones that I really like and I could use really quickly. But then I also did the similar sound function on an open hat somewhere in the song. Basically same idea as the kick, sliced it out and then opened in the browser here and then press that little button. And then I added in a bunch of different additional hat sounds to get something a little bit closer to what I was hearing in the reference. Other than that, a little bit of processing. This is the standard channel strip that I have that shows up on pretty much every MIDI and audio track. I leave the kick and the bass slightly different because I want the low end to just come through nicely, and I do a lot less of this processing, but let's get that yap out of the way. First thing is some EQ. This is usually set up to be rolling off at least 200 hertz. That way it's kind of in a good spot where it's making room for the kick and the bass, and then I can quickly adjust it. In this instance, we're moving a whole ton of the low end so that the open hat's mostly just kind of like shimmering in the high end mostly, because it is being reinforced by additional sounds, shakers, and close hats, which we'll go in a second. The next thing is it's running into this transient shaper. So this is a free kilohertz transient shaper. What we're doing here is we're adjusting the sustain of the sound so that it's a bit tighter sounding. And I feel like that's a pretty good key to professional sounding drums when things are tight and cohesive as opposed to like loose and floppy. And then we're running into a little bit of Ableton saturation. Again, I've just mapped it to a knob here. So I can just one knob it instead of having to open up like the plugins and look at the UI and all this stuff. I can just quickly dial it into ear with my ear and then move on to the next step really quick. This is just making the sound a little bit fuller, adding a little bit of grit and texture. And then I also have been experimenting with this. We're going to get into this as well in the melodic section. But this is a program called Fast Reveal where you can add the sidechain. So the sidechain is the vocal. And then this is using the vocal to duck certain like EQ bands, frequency bands, when the vocal is appearing, just to get it out of the way of the vocal. I found the open hat to be quite like intense in this one. And I was using this as a technique to allow the vocal to shine through a little bit more. But then other than that, main thing is flicking back and forth between the reference and this. and really just trying to listen to the open hat to dial in the right volume. The next thing that I was hearing was this shaker sound. Definitely sounds like the main driving elements of that open hat groove is that open hat combined with a shaker. So let's have a look and listen to that. And soloed. So you can see here, it's following a similar pattern to the open hat. It might look a little confusing at first, but it won't in a second. So basically you can see that everything's landing on the offbeat here, just like the open hat. And simply what I've done is layered in two different sounds. And I have two playing at the same time, and then a different two playing, fluctuating every like half beat or so, or half bar or so. And this is just a way to make it sound a little bit more human. Things are slightly changing over time. Stuff like this is pretty important in house music to make things, make it sound like it's changing and evolving instead of sounding like robotic and crappy and too rigid. Switching up the samples is a nice way to add some humanization touch. And then it's doing a little kind of fillish thing that's similar to the open hat to kind of play together with that. So just the open hat and the shakers. And then just the open hat. So it's basically adding some body and texture to the open hat. It's a really cool little trick there. Main thing other than that is I just looked up shaker sounds in my library here and just found them. I didn't do any similar sound feature or anything like that. I didn't have too many shakers to look through, so it wasn't too bad. Any processing that's going on here, the shaker shouldn't be too much, and that's a pattern you'll notice. Just removing some of the lows, adjusting some of the sustain to tighten it up, and a little bit of saturation to pull it out a bit more. Make it sound a little bit fuller. And then let's move on to the next element. Next element I ended up adding was a top loop. This is a little different than the way I normally go about things. Usually I'll kind of get the core elements in with MIDI, so like kick, open hat, hat, snare, and then add in some like extra texture with a top loop. But in this instance, I was feeling it a little earlier. So let's have a listen to this. And so what like a top loop is nice for is complementing your core hits that you've added in to make things sound a little bit more natural and groovy and human. And it's really hard to program in some of these things. So it could be a nice way to add in a loop like this. A couple of tips when adding in tops like this is when you click the clip, you can set it to beats and transients and then set it so the right arrow, this arrow is pointing to the right. And then you can dial this knob down, and this is going to do similar to that transient shaper that we were using where we're adjusting the sustain. It's going to tighten up all the hits, and when this is nice and tight, it can really blend a lot nicer into the rest of your core hits. So that's a nice little trick there. Other than that, removing some lows, a little bit of one knob sidechain. Let me just quickly show you how I do that. So instead of like routing a compressor and dialing in compressor settings and all of that really annoying stuff, in my opinion, I just have an Ableton shaper going in this kind of shape here. Moving at a rate of a quarter note, which is a quarter note, it's what the kick is hitting. And then it's just ducking the gain here. So this one knob just shows how much, adjusts how much volume is being ducked. So with just one knob, I can get like that ducking sound, which is allowing the tops here to make room for the kick because it's ducking out of the way of the kick. And also that's like a nice pumping kind of sound that's very, very pleasant in dance music. It's very groovy, I would say. Then adding in a bit of saturation, filling out that top sound a bit. And then also here is the last bit of the channel strip that I always use. This is it's called Polyverse Wider, and it's a free plugin, again, just like the transient shaper. And just like that transient shaper, I've mapped the core knobs to an Ableton rack here so that I can dial things into taste instead of having to open it up and get distracted. And what this is doing is a nice pleasant way to push the sound to the left and right, make it a little bit more stereo, which is also making some room for everything else in the middle to shine through. You're making space for it. This with the top loop mostly dialed into taste as opposed to doing like the flick back and forth reference technique. And then the next element I added was these closed hats. So let's have a look and listen. Solos. So this one is something I added in to try to get it sound closer to the reference. I had a different, more subtle hat sound playing. And then I used like that similar sound functionality on the open hat to find this closed one and then adjusted it here. So originally this was a different sound. And you can see the pattern. It's just classic, offbeat open hat pattern. Again, set up in the template, so it's already like this. So it's just a process of moving it up and down as you're referencing the track. In terms of any processing, removing some of the lows, increasing some of the sustain to try to make it sound a little bit more like an open hat and blend in with those shakers and open hats a bit. A little bit of saturation to fill out the sound, add a little bit of grit and texture. And then again, with this, back to the idea of listening to it and then flicking back between the reference. So you can hear there with the closed hat, the shaker, and those open hats, it's starting to sound a little bit fuller and closer to the original reference. At this point, I then moved on to the claps and snares. What I was hearing first was the clap, so I added that in. Let's take a look and listen to that. So for this, the pattern is like the classic snare or clap pattern. So it's on the 2 and the 4 of each bar. So if we just look at this, this is what the template originally looked like. It's already set up in those classic positions. So then it's just a matter of either switching the sample around or making some slight adjustments with the basis already ready there to go. Makes things a little faster when you're cooking up tunes. Again, you can see similar to idea to the shaker sound where I've layered 2 sounds and it's kind of changing from hit to hit. Again, as a humanization kind of way. In terms of the sound selection for this is similar to the open hat that I showed you, where I have a library here of like clap sounds that I've vetted. So that way I'm not looking through 200 clap sounds. I have like 5 or 6 that I like quite a lot that I've used as reference when referencing other tracks that I like, and it's just a go-to. It speeds things up. Again, this is in the product file if you want to grab this template. Once finding the sounds, a little bit of the processing, removing a little bit of lows, sustain to tighten things up. That's about it. And then the main idea, again, is listening to the clap, really focus on the clap, and then focus on the clap in the reference. So not totally similar, but very close, and that's kind of the idea. Other than that, I think something that is kind of interesting that I might show you is like in the device here, you can see I have one pan a little bit to the left, the other one pan a little to the right, one pan to the left, and the other one pan a little bit to the right. So that way the claps are pushed a bit to the left and right. Then the next element that I added in was the snare. The snare is like a bit more of like a low end that can complement the clap, kind of fill out that sound a little bit. Claps and snares layered together is like a nice combo, just in the same way open hats and shakers are layered together. So let's have a look and listen to this. So there it is. This is, again, similar to the technique that I just mentioned before, building your own little library of preferred stuff in a drum rack. Super, super important. It makes things a lot easier to work with. This way I just found a couple that I liked here. I layered 2 sounds together, as you can see here. And then in terms of processing, moving some of the lows, increasing the attack a bit, so it's kind of making it a bit more punchy. Dialing back the sustain, so it's tightening it up a little bit, and increasing some of the saturation, so it's filling up the sound, adding some grit and texture. Main thing with this is a little bit different than listening to the reference. Something I'd probably recommend doing is something like this. Bringing down the snare, and then dialing it in, so you can start to hear it. And doing it a little bit more to taste when you're doing a layer like that. You can also be flicking back and forth in between the reference and what you got going on. But sometimes it can be a little harder when you're listening to layered sounds like that. So you might want to dial it in to taste like that. Next thing that I added in was this ride. So let's have a look and listen to this. So this is just a cool ride that I think I got from some kind of like remix pack or something like that. I don't know. What we got going in here is using some kind of like flanger kind of thing that I found. I don't know how I found this. Soft is what it's called, I guess. I think I looked flanger. It looks like it's some kind of flanger sound. So this is adding that kind of like little bit of like a warbly. Here it sounds more straight. You can hear that phasing. So yeah, there's some kind of cool phasing stuff going on in some bits of the song. I notice it might be more of like a transitional arrangement trick, but it's really cool. Then I throw in this auto pan so that it's moving left and right. I feel like that's just a cool thing to do. Removing a bunch of the lows, side chain so it's pumping, and making a kick and a little bit of saturation. And then this one, I think you can hear there's something going on there. Very like there's like some kind of ride going on there in the back end. Super cool stuff in this track. Other than that, there's some like little bits here. Like we listen to this little fills, especially in the intro thing. If you listen to the reference, so something like that. Just kind of use some of the sounds in the library here to recreate that. Nothing too crazy, because what does happen is this little fill happens very similarly in a bunch of different spots in the arrangement. So before the verse here, after this break, cool stuff there. And then one of the last things that I do want to mention that I've been doing is I've been playing with some drum processing, and that's why I have the kick out. So what I've been doing is using this other free plugin called the compressor. Why I like this, compressor, is because you can press this little magic button, and you can say like, okay, we're going to be compressing drums, and I want moderate compression, and then it'll listen to it and set the settings. So it's a nice starting point to compress everything. Compression is nice on drums. It kind of glues everything together in one way and also brings up some of the subtleties of things. So that way you can work with less elements, but it'll sound fuller. So that's kind of what I've been trying to play with in that respect there. And I'm finding by having the kick outside, compressor reacts a little bit better because or else the kick is so loud compared to everything else. It kind of like dominates the compression settings. And what I wanted is like mostly to compress all like the snares and hats and all that kind of stuff without like the kick coming in and adding way too much intense compression. That's kind of the idea there. And then something I do is like a mixing trick is I usually aim for about a decibel or 2 decibels clipped to cut off some of the tops. And that way you're reducing the dynamic range, and this way it's a lot easier to mix and master at the end and get a loud master. But yeah, that's a look at the drum for this one. All right. So when it comes to the melodic stuff, there's a specific order that I do like to work on this. So it's either going to be the bass or the main hook, which would be something like the vocal or maybe like a keyboard part or something like that. And the reason for that is those are kind of the main fundamental things of dance music: drums, bass, and like the hook. So getting those right first is really important because then it sets the foundation for your track, and then you can build everything else around it, working to the main goal of supporting those main elements. In this instance, what I worked on first was the bass. So let me show you how I did this. Basically what I did is I found a section of this song. Believe I found a section of the song and cut it out. Something like here. And then what you can do in Ableton is if you grab this audio track here, and you can see this is a MIDI track. If you grab this and just drag it down into the MIDI track, a dialog box is going to come up like this, and it's going to convert your audio to MIDI. There's 3 options: harmony, melody, and drums. When you're doing bass, you would do melody. So you click this, and I'll show you what it looks like. It's going to kind of create some notes here for you to kind of use as a jumping off point when creating your bass or melodies or anything like that. So it's a cool way to work. But basically what I did, let's have a look at the bass. Let's actually have a look and listen to it. And then let's listen to the reference. So as you can hear, it's similar. It's in a different key. So what I did was first kind of create this pattern, which is like do, 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 do. I kind of created that pattern in the right key as the reference track. And then I quickly moved on to the vocal so that I could change the bass to be in the key of the vocal that I wanted to work with. We're going to get into that in a second. So main thing here is it's just kind of this cool little rolling bass line. I adjusted it a bit compared to the original, other than changing the key. And then I played quite a bit with, like, instead of just having things at like standard values, like right here or here, like on the grid, going over a little bit or under a little bit in an effort to kind of tighten up the sound. I'm trying to get my bass to sound more articulate lately, and this is a way that I've been trying to do that by tightening up the MIDI notes. So this next, that's kind of a look at the. I'm not very music theory, so I'm not going to dive too much into that. I'm really focused on like finishing songs quickly and using interesting techniques to do that. And music theory is not interesting to me. So we're going to move on to the next step after getting the pattern, which is very similar to the drums. So it's a pattern, and then we do the sound selection. So in this case, there's some fun stuff I like to do with the bass. So the first thing you'll notice here is that there's 2 layers of the bass. And the first one is the sub. So the first thing I like to get down is the sub. There's a couple reasons for that. One is it's just a very simple bass tone, so you can really focus on getting the right notes, similar to when like a guitarist or a pianist or any musician might use a guitar, acoustic guitar or piano first, because it's so unperverted by crazy sound design or anything like that. You can really focus on making sure that the right notes are being hit. And then there's also a mixing technique I'm going to show you as well in a second. But first, looking at the sub sound, I have this little thing called the B sub. Basically, it's just an Ableton operator device, which is just running a sine wave. A sine wave is like the purest waveform that you can have, so it creates the purest form of bass. And then I just have different levels of saturation that I can dial in to add a bit of grit and texture to the sub, as well as make it so it's going to punch through laptop speakers a little bit better. Other than that, we have this one knob sidechain, which is similar to what I've shown you in the drum video. Same idea, it's a one knobber there, so that way it's making room for the kick and also giving it a nice little bounce. Other than that, we're dialing out back a little bit of the high end here, scooping out a little bit of the mids. There's all these like little bits in this to make it a lot quicker and easier to dial in a nice sub sound and move on quickly. The next thing that I like to do is you'll see it's broken down into 2 layers here. So we have the sub and the bass guitar. What I like to do is have a mid bass layer. So the sub is taking care of all the low end, just pure nice low end. That's all it has to do. And this way, by separating out the mids and highs into a separate track, you can go crazy with the sound design without worrying about making any choices that might screw up your low end. So it gives you like a lot of flexibility in that way, which I really like. So here's how I do that. I have the sub track here, and then on this additional track, you'll notice that there is no MIDI playing. Instead, what I've done is if you click on here at the top here, it'll say all ins. All ins would bring in all of the MIDI that's on the track and play it through whatever you have, like VST or whatever, right? The instrument. If you instead change that to a different one, so in this instance, subs, it's now routing the MIDI information also through subs and into the bass guitar layer here. So this MIDI is going straight into the bass guitar layer here. Why that is useful is as you're building out your track, say you change the key of the track or you change up the bass line, you'd have to copy and paste that a million times over on both of these tracks. And this way, if you make a change on this sub track, it's automatically going to reflect on the bass guitar track and you're good to go. So it's just a quicker, faster, more efficient, smarter way to work. Couple things that you'll want to note here though. On this layer, it's useful to have a pitch device like this, because there's going to be instances where the octave that your sub sounds good on is not the same octave that your bass guitar or mid bass layer is going to sound good on. So if you didn't have this pitch, you'd have to copy it over and then shift up the octaves on your MIDI clip here, like actually going into it like this, and then pressing shift and up like that. In this instance, we can just use this little pitch device to adjust the MIDI. So this is a MIDI pitch. It's not actually adjusting the audio in any way. It's just adjusting the pitch of the MIDI. So this way, pushing it up 2 octaves from what sounded good on the sub. And then I have this nice little bass guitar sample that I like to use. This is from a plugin called Trillion, and I've just sampled it out and then threw it into a sampler here. If you want the project files, you can grab this as well. This way there's less of a load on the computer, and I'm not opening up some big ass annoying VST. I can just quickly move through and use some and just move on here. Another thing here is with the mid bass layer, what you're going to want to do is use the high pass filter here to remove a bunch of the low end. So in this instance, we're removing 200 hertz. This is just going to make room for the sub to do its subby thing. And this way, this is just taking care of the mid bass without interfering and masking or overlapping in a shitty way on over the sub. Other than that, I'm using this width plugin, again the Polyverse wider plugin. It's dialing in a sense. The mid bass is going a little bit more stereo left and right, and the sub is just taking care of the low end. So it's also helping the sub kind of punch through a bit more because it's not being masked in any way. And then a little bit of the one knob sidechain, a little bit of the saturation to push out the sound, make it sound a little fuller. So altogether, it sounds like this. Without the mid bass. And then with it. So it's subtle, but it adds a nice little bit of extra character, and it's also going to help that push through on laptop speakers. And then on the group, we're using this the compressor thing again. So again, I set it to magic mode bass. I think I was on gentle or moderate, and this way it's making the bass sound a little tighter, reducing the dynamic range. That way you can turn it up a bit, and it's also making it sound fuller. So like the smaller details are coming out more, which makes that simple layer sound a little fuller. Running into a clipper to get it's usually around a decibel or so clipped. And that's again further reducing the dynamic range, so that way when we're mastering it, we're going to be able to make it a lot louder, a lot easier. So once that is set up, the next element that I'm going to go over is some of the melodic stuff. And so again, this is a new trick that I've been doing. So you'll notice the vocals used to always be in the melodic group if you've been following this channel for a while. Now I'm testing having it outside for the same reason. For like you'll see. So let me first turn it on and show you what that sounds like. I could eat that girl for lunch, and she dances on my tongue. Tastes like she might be the one. So this is the Billie Eilish song Lunch. A buddy of mine, Dragon, wanted me to remix it, so I did. Basically, I found the track on YouTube, ripped it, and then used a program called lala.ai to separate the vocal from the rest of the track. This way I have a nice clean vocal track that I can use, and I can build up the rest of the song without using anything else. Well, I do use the little like vocal hush thing you'll see, but the majority of the rest of this track does not have anything from the Billie Eilish song. This way I can easily remove this and then have somebody else sing over top of it, or use it for a completely original mix if I want to. If you have too much of like the actual sampled song in there, it's gonna be very hard you're not gonna get it cleared, so you're not gonna really be able to properly release it. So this is a nice way to get around that. Main thing here is removing some of the lows, sidechain, so it's pumping a little saturation pushed out, but the main thing is flicking back and forth. And really getting the volume right. Getting the volume right is the most important thing here, particularly with vocals. We are doing a little bit of the center return processing. So I have this reverb here, the Valhalla Vintage Reverb. The only interesting thing that I really do with this is I adjust the decay by using a reverb time calculator. So you punch in the BPM, and then you could adjust the decay. So this, in this instance, is actually decaying at a half note. And when you're doing it in a rhythmic value like that, there's less like bleed and smearing happening. So you can increase the amount of reverb without it getting too washed out, because it's decaying in a musical way. So it's gone by the time the next hit comes, so it doesn't wash out. That's a fun little trick there. Makes things sound a little lusher and fuller. Running it into two different delays. I have a short delay, just Ableton Echo at an eighth note, dialing that in so it's filling it out a little bit, adding a little groove. And then the next one is a longer one at a quarter note. And this is like that more spacey echo that goes really far left and right and kind of fills things out in a nice way. That's kind of look at that. That's why I would recommend doing the bass and the vocal first. So basically the technique I did here was I added in the bass. It was in the key of the Chris Lake remix there. And then I figured out the vocal, threw the vocal in, adjusted the bass so that it was matching the vocal. And then here we have like the foundation of the track. So now we're going to rip through some of the rest of the melodic stuff. So that is going to all be in this group. So let me turn it on and show you what it all sounds like. Cool, so it sounds sick as fuck. A little different from the original, but let's get into it. First things first that I added was this thing called main chord. So let's have a listen. I could eat that girl for lunch, and she... So this little like chord snippet that I found on Splice and just kind of chopped it up. That's kind of what I was hearing, something like that in the Chris Lake one. If we listen, it just sounds like there's like a smearing of like of the original sample being cut up, and like it's very subtle. It's very interesting. I had a fun and difficult time working through it, but I just found some chords that were in the same key as that I was working in, cut it up in this nice little way. And then in terms of processing, added in this Ableton Roar stereo drive preset, kind of making it sound more distorted and adding some character to it, removing a bunch of the lows, so it's making room for the kick and the sub, and then also removing a bunch of the highs. So it's making room for the vocals, but it sounded like it was this smearing of all these different cool chopped up samples from the remix like download that he had there. Other than that, we're doing some sidechain, so this sound is pumping, making room for the kick, and also adding some vibe and character. I also threw in this free A1 trigger gate, which is adding a little bit of that kind of stutter house kind of sound, to make it sound a little more interesting. And then using that polyverse wider plugin again to push things left and right, make it a little more stereo. The next element that I added in was this thing. I'm going to also turn up the vocal so I can you can hear a little bit more. I'll turn it back and off and on so you can hear it in context. But we have this one and this one. So it's actually two parts from the same sample. Did I do anything weird with like the pitch? Yeah. So I have one actually playing a -5 semitones, which I think would be like a third. And then I have this other one playing at +7, which I believe is a fifth. So it's kind of adjusting the sound and kind of making it like some kind of interesting harmony that's being played here. In terms of the processing, it's probably gonna be the same thing. So stereo drive, the bottom scooped out, the top scooped out, same exact processing. I just have one panned a little to the left, one panned a little bit more to the right, and their pitches have been adjusted so that they're doing some kind of interesting harmony. So together they sound like this. And that was the first kind of like stab that I tried to take to create that kind of sampled high passed or low passed kind of vibe that seems to be happening to fill up the Chris Lake track there, the Chris Lake edit. Next thing that I was trying to get in was the guitar, which is a pretty big part of the song. So let's have a listen to that. And solo it. So for this, it's a little different sounding than the original track. So if we listen to the original track, so yeah, I think that sounds like a guitar to me. I found a sample that's not quite as similar. It's more like plucked. So it sounds like a little bit of a different vibe. But in my instance, I kind of want to take it in a slightly different direction, but still have like the inspiration from the Fool for Love track. So that sound a little bit more unique. And then also blends in a little bit more with the vocal and hook that I chose. And that's something I'd recommend when you're following this kind of style of creating music. Using the reference track to build things out and make sure you're getting similar sounds, similar patterns, and similar volume levels, but then also making sure you do take creative liberties at a certain point so you are creating an original piece of music that you could actually use. And is simply inspired by it as opposed to as a full clone or remake. So with this main guitar, we're just removing some of the lows, ducking out some of the sustain to tighten it up, very similar technique that we were using for the drums. Some sidechain, so it's making room for the kick and also giving it a little bit of bounce and a little bit of saturation here to fill out the sound a little bit. And then also I threw this like flanger on here. So similar how I threw it on the ride in the drum bit, this is adding a little bit of that kind of modulation kind of sound that I feel like is happening throughout the track. Then what I added in was this next bit here. Sounds so sick on its own. And this is kind of similar to those first bits, those chord bits that I was adding. I was trying to add something to also fill out the lower mids of the track and add that kind of like weird sampley cut up bit that I can kind of hear in the track. That's how it sounds all together. Soloed and all together. And then with the vocal. So yeah, that's the idea there. It's kind of reinforcing that low end and kind of doing a little bit of a call and response in some way to like the guitar, like kind of bouncing off each other in a way like that. In terms of processing, getting rid of a bunch of the lows, a bunch of the highs as well. I feel like that was a pretty common thing in the melodic elements here. Adding in that same stereo drive, so it's adding in some like distortion and grit and texture and character to the sound, and using the same preset as those other elements. So kind of in some way making them sound like they're all part of the same family there. And then a little side chain to make it pump. The next thing I was like, you know what? I'm added a guitar, but it doesn't seem to be doing the trick. it's not as present and as like intense as it is in the reference. So I added a couple additional layers to make up for that. So let's listen to the next layer that I added, right? Soloed. So it's basically kind of following the same pattern, like the do, 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 do. And this one I added it so like the second time it comes around, it like pauses a little and then hits the note. So it's a little bit of like a little change that I like that makes it sound a little bit more unique compared to the reference. In terms of the sound, and I guess here's like a look at the MIDI too. So it's playing like this, do, 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 like that. And in terms of the sound design, a fun thing I like to do is I looked up a guitar sample, like a single one note sample, a guitar that I thought sounded pretty good on Splice, then dragged it into the track here, and that'll turn it into an Ableton Simpler. If you right click it and you can change Simpler to Sampler, Sampler has a bit of additional feature which can be useful. So this is the song of the key of G, and I've adjusted the root note so that it is, I think I did it just in a weird way, but you can adjust the root note so it's the same as the sample. And this way, when you press a C on the keyboard, it's actually going to be a C on the, like that it actually plays, as opposed to it pitching it up or down. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, then let me know, make a video on it or something. But then I threw it into this RC20, the sampler preset, kind of giving it a little bit of wobble and some noise and distortion to give it a bit more character. I feel like that was a common thing I was trying to do here, add some like distortion-y sounds to these elements to make them sound a little dirtier, a little sampled, a little more, something more interesting going on with them. Removing a bunch of the lows, making room for the kick of the bass, sidechain so it's making room for the kick and it's pumping, and saturation again, push that sound a little bit like that. This one's pushed way more to the right. The first guitar was pushed more to the left, so kind of balancing things out a little bit. Putting in a space by adding in some reverb, delays, those kind of things. And then the next element I added was this next guitar. Oh, solid. Listen for that on the right side. So this is kind of reinforcing that new guitar layer. It's playing same notes, but same like kind of patterns. But I've just adjusted the notes because this one. Wait, sorry. Get to this one. This one was in the key of C. So I didn't have to do the root note change. And we remove some of the lows, sidechain so it's pumping, similar stuff. This is just like a higher octave sound that's reinforcing the other one and making it cut through a little bit more and adding a little bit of grit and texture. I wouldn't say this is, not grit and texture, but like character to the sound. And then definitely not something that I heard in the reference. This was more of a stylistic choice. Then we'll move on to a couple more things I want to show you here. So next up is this sound here. So what that is just like in the Billie Eilish song, she does this cool little breathy beatboxing thing. And I thought it just sounded cool. And so threw it in here. And so it kind of sounds really cool, particularly in the intro. Oops, I don't want to record nothing. So it particularly adds like some cool vibes in parts of the song where there's less going on. It's like not a full chorus with all the vocals and everything. That's definitely not in the in the original track. So this is a decision I made. In terms of processing, using the EQ8 here in mid side mode. So this way on the mids, we're scooping out a bit more. So that way there's less happening in the center. And then on the right, we're scooping out a bit less of the low end. This way it's making room for the vocal in the middle. It's kind of the technique there that I'm going for. A little sidechain so it's pumping, and that polyverse wider plugin so it's pushing it far to the left and right. We don't want that interfering with the main vocal. That's kind of the idea there. And then the last thing I added as a last minute addition to kind of counteract or balance out, I should say, like this element here, this boom, which is panned to the right. I wanted something panned to the left. So I feel like I was carrying maybe some kind of string thing going on here. Really, I was having some trouble with like it was just so interesting, some of the melodic techniques that were used in this edit. But let's have a listen to that. soloed. So very subtle. It's just kind of balancing things out with a more of that like that filtered out kind of interesting sound that's going on here. And that way there's something like that happening on the right and now something like that happening on the left. It's a little string sound that I found on Splice, chopped it up a bit using that same stereo drive. So it's adding that same kind of distortion that a lot of the other elements are having. So it's kind of putting everything in the same space and making it sound like it's part of the same. It's all happened together kind of thing. Removing some lows, removing some highs, a bit more sidechain, so that one's pumping quite a bit more. Let's kind of look at that. And then before moving on, one thing I do want to show you is similar to like the drums and the bass, we're using this compressor here, using the magic setting on the synths, gentle or moderate. So it's kind of compressing everything, reducing the dynamic range so that we can increase the volume a lot easier in the mastering process. And then also kind of filling out the sound a bit more is what I've been trying to like get with that, where you can use less elements, but since they're compressed and so like a lot of the details coming out more, it fills out the sound more and you can do more with less. Then the next thing here is I throw in this fast reveal. So this is something I really want to be experimenting with a lot in the next little bit. This and a couple other versions are going to be similar plugins that I want to test. So what this does is over here on the sidechain, I've selected the vocal. And this is running into the vocal is now like this plugin's listening to the vocal, and you can press learn while it's playing and it's going to listen to the vocal and the material that like is on this whole melodic group. And it's going to duck it in a light way so that it is bringing down whenever the vocal comes in, those vocal frequencies, it's going to reduce them a bit on all the melodic stuff like those guitars and the synths and all those samples. So this way it's making room for the vocal only when the vocal is actually playing. So it's a really subtle thing. It's something I'm experimenting with quite a bit. And that's why I also like to have this now in a separate bit or a separate group. This way it's not sidechaining it within the group and then also pushing it down and using itself as so like that's kind of the idea that I was going for there. Other than that, quick look at the arrangement here. So the idea that I always like to do is we just built up like the drums, the bass, the vocals, the melodic stuff, all that in a vertical way. We just built it up like a nice loop. By having the arrangement track like we showed earlier in the drum section, it's a lot easier to kind of flesh this out. You can copy and paste everything to the left and right and then reduce elements as you need to. And you can flick back and forth between the reference, be like, okay, the intro's here. Let's remove some elements. The verse comes in, everything but the vocals or something. And you can use this as a way to use these arrangement markers to quickly know what a professional arrangement is and where things should come in and out. And then you can also be flicking back and forth to the actual reference to hear what's going on. You can pull your elements and add additional elements as needed. Then the last thing I'll do is this effects group here, which is again part of the template that I have. Adding things like reverse crashes. So like when the first comes in, a crash hits and there's a reverse crash leading into it. Doing that on kind of these main hits here. When a chorus comes, it adds more impact. Adding things like a 909 roll, little like these kind of sounds. Risers and like little ear candy, like laser sounds, white noise lifters, those kind of things. Doing them so that they're going into sections. So that's why it's also used to have these arrangement markers. You can be like, okay, I want to have a white noise going into the verse, and you can clearly see where that is. And sometimes going down out of them, so they're doing kind of like a downer kind of sound. Those kind of things really add a little bit of extra professionalism and flair. So if you want to check out the project files, you can have a nice full look at all the small little details. I don't feel like going into that today. But you found this useful. And make sure you stick around to the end of the video. We'll be doing an 80-20 rule recap so you can apply everything that you're learning here into your own music as quickly as possible.
Hi, my friend. Matt from Best Friends Club here. And if you've been paying attention to this super long video, then you've probably figured out what the 80-20 rule is when it comes to building out your songs. The goal here is to get 80% of the result with only 20% of the time, energy, and effort. And because the first key to the 80-20 rule here is to use a reference track, we're making sure that we're very easily hitting 80% of a high quality, professionally made song. In particular, we use that reference track to make sure that we're picking the right notes, sounds, and volumes as we're building out our song. The second key of the 80-20 rule here is to mix as you go in an extremely streamlined way by only focusing on the volume of each track as well as using a simple, repeatable channel strip for each track that we're adding to our songs. The third and final key is to repurpose your old project files and have a suite of powerful templates, Ableton racks, and one-knob effects that you've personalized and curated over time. If you'd like to get a head start by downloading all the racks, templates, and all the files that you've seen me use in the Ableton project file for this video, or if you'd just like to take a closer look at any of the techniques or tracks you saw me work on in this video at your own pace, you can find a link to this video's project files on screen now and at the second link that's in the YouTube description. I'm recreating a different song from the Beatport top charts every single week and making the project files available to anyone who wants them. You'll also get access to a private Discord where you can ask me and the community questions, as well as share tracks for feedback. If you or your music are not quite ready for a shot in the arm like that, I've also made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that have helped me figure out how to completely finish one new song each and every single week. And you can grab that free Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit by visiting the first link that's in the YouTube description here. However, if you just feel like staying on YouTube for now, that's totally fine. Save that link for later, and check out this playlist filled with videos just like the one you just watched, where I completely create songs inspired by tracks found in the Beatport top charts. Or if you really want to take what you've learned in this video to the next level, make sure you check out this video right here.